Monday mornings in Oak City, North Carolina are slow. Not much happens. It's a tiny town about 18 miles northwest of Williamston in a very rural part of the state. It's got a town hall, a gas station, a fire department, a bunch of churches, and one stoplight. Back in October 1992, there was even less stuff around.
On Sunday, Mexicans are going to vote, and it's going to be a historic vote. It's going to be the biggest election in Mexican history.
Around 100 million people are called to cast ballots. Millions of Mexicans abroad are also expected to take part in the process.
After the dust settles, Mexico will have its first ever woman president.
Vamos a ganar las gubernaturas y va a haber presidenta de la República y será de la Cuarta Transformación. ¡Que viva Morena!
The betting money is on Claudia Sheinbaum. About a month ago, she was traveling through the southern Chiapas state when masked men stopped her vehicle to interrogate her. Was she going to do something to address all the violence? Was she going to do something about security? We're going to ask the same questions on Today Explained.
Están escuchando a Hoy Explicado. Today Explained.
Megan Janetsky covers Central America and Mexico for the Associated Press. And speaking to her, it became very clear that you couldn't really talk about Mexico's likely future president, Claudia Sheinbaum, without talking about Mexico's outgoing president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, AMLO has kind of been larger than life in this election.
¡Que viva el presidente Andrés Manuel López Obrador! ¡Que viva México!
The thing you have to know is that he's highly popular. When he got elected almost 6 years ago, it was a big deal because he had unseated the party that had been in power for 70 plus years. And that's because he spoke to a swath of the population that has long felt forgotten by the political establishment. You have poor Mexicans in rural areas that simply by walking and talking like them,
nada más que el pueblo dijo basta y se acabó ese pinche modelo.
Speaking in the same way, they feel represented in a lot of ways. It's interesting because really none of the other candidates have that same charisma that he has, despite a lot of his policies, especially like the security policy being relatively controversial. He's still loved by a great portion of Mexico.
Tell me about security policy. Tell me what promises he made to the Mexican people when he was running for office, when he was entering office regarding security.
So a big part of his government was basically on rewiring the way Mexico takes on crime, in part to distance himself from other former presidents like Felipe Calderón, who launched a drug war and saw violence shoot up.
Calderón can claim some success. In December 2009, Mexican Marines killed the so-called boss of bosses, drug lord Arturo Beltrán Leyva, after a 2-hour shootout here in Cuernavaca.
And basically, AMLO, his idea was instead of taking out these kingpins and, pursuing these criminal groups like they have for a long time, pursue a policy that he referred to as abrazos, no balazos.
No balazos.
Or hugs, not bullets, is kind of the rough translation. And the core of the strategy is basically addressing what he described as the root causes of violence.
Nosotros consideramos que los seres humanos,
we believe that human beings are not born evil. It is the circumstances that lead some to take the path of antisocial behavior. And if we change those circumstances, we can live in a better society.
mejor.
Rooting out corruption in the police and expanding social welfare programs to, poor and marginalized communities.
Lopez Obrador has spent unapologetically on social programs, doubling the minimum wage, increasing pensions and scholarships.
So the idea is essentially that if you provide them with opportunities, they fuel the ranks of prostitutes cartels and other groups.
His approval rating has remained high, upwards of 60% for most of his presidency.
captured the attention of a lot of voters when he was elected.
Hugs, not bullets. Policy, not drug war.
Yeah.
How does that go once he enters office?
Looking back now, many say AMLO's strategy has been more based on pushing a PR campaign than actually solving Mexico's security problems, which is a lot harder. So in many cases, his government has declined to confront cartels and other criminal groups.
Can you reach the cartel and say, knock it off?
No.
What you have to do with the criminals is apply the law. But I'm not going to establish contact, communication with a criminal, the president of Mexico.
They've expanded a lot, and it's basically allowed them to continue further carving out these fiefdoms in strategic parts of Mexico. Many say it also has allowed cartels to expand in power. So, extortion has gone up massively. You've seen cartels using higher caliber arms, using drones to drop effectively bombs on security forces, using armored vehicles, using makeshift IEDs. He also did make significant changes in a way. He launched a major social welfare program, but what it really did was replace the former program, which provides funds to specific vulnerable populations, with one that hands out payments across the board. So effectively, Mexico's poorest are suddenly receiving less money, while some of Mexico's wealthiest started getting money they didn't really need.
Mexico City, the wealth gap between the richest and the poorest is one of the widest anywhere in the world.
He also proposed demilitarizing the public security and reforming the police. And he did disband the corrupt federal police and replace it with National Guard. But you also see his government using the military for things that you wouldn't normally think of the military doing, like building a train in the south of the country, and not sharing information about a project that would normally be public and claiming it was a matter of national security. So in a lot of ways, the military has entered the civilian atmosphere.
So he's reinvested in the Mexican military, but 6 or so years later, is Mexico safe? Did he deliver on this promise?
So I would say it depends who you ask. If you ask many Mexicans, your tortilla vendor, people in disputed areas of Mexico, it's pretty bad. Under AMLO, cartels and other criminal groups have expanded in power, extortion has expanded. These groups have grown, more complex, to the point where oftentimes they're compared more to giant illegal companies that are constantly ahead of authorities in this cat and mouse game. Because they're warring with each other, they constantly have to, one-up each other, think of more creative strategies, trickling into other things that aren't just drug trafficking, So you have them entering the lucrative avocado industry, real estate scams. I even a few months ago did a story about how one gang was effectively forcing locals to pay to access hijacked Wi-Fi.
Los Viagras cartel are behind the threats in multiple towns in Mexico's Michoacan state. They allegedly forced over 5,000 locals to use their stolen antennas, charging up to 500 pesos per month to use it. They were told if they didn't, they'd be killed.
And this makes them more flexible as well, they have other profit margins that way. When the authorities zig, they zag. And they've also dipped their feet even more into the migrant smuggling industry, which obviously is very lucrative nowadays.
A senior U.S. official tells us amid a global migration surge that the trafficking industry is booming. It's now a multi-billion-dollar business.
That said, the government says that things have gotten better, and they cite homicide rates, which are about the same as when López Obrador took office. But you have other things like many say forced disappearances are on the rise.
Demonstrators outside a federal government building in Mexico City. They're the families of missing persons, and they say they want answers over why dozens of case files have been erased from Facebook. from the official government census on forced disappearances.
And I think overall, what few can dispute is that, the criminal framework and all of these different moving parts are far more complex today than they were like 15 years ago.
So I don't really get it. Homicide rates are basically the same. Disappearance rates are up. But you're saying AMLO is this super popular president, and his chosen successor, Claudia Sheinbaum, is all but sure to win.
It's because, again, he has tapped into a swath of the population that is always felt forgotten. Poor rural Mexicans have never felt considered by Mexico City elite, despite the fact that, for instance, a lot of poor populations haven't benefited as much from his welfare program, and that violence in swaths of the country continues to be really high, and things continue to be really dangerous. They also see a man that talks like them, that speaks to them, and sees them as a political asset. So that's why Claudia Sheinbaum continues to be at the top of the polls. One thing she cites a lot is that she's the former mayor of Mexico City, which is significant because Mexico City basically hasn't been as hard hit by cartel violence like you've seen in a lot of rural areas. She's basically pitched herself to the Mexican public as a continuation of AMLO and his policies.
Does that mean that she's not going to be much different on this significant question of security in Mexico?
I think the big question looking forward, insecurity and just everything else, is is Claudia Sheinbaum going to be AMLO 2.0, or is she going to chart her own path? What is notable is that, no matter what path she chooses to take, she is inheriting a puzzle that is more complicated than pretty much any other Mexican president has inherited before. You have all of these different warring factions, you have more flexible groups diving into different industries and stuff like that. It's just way harder to unravel than it was before. And that's not just because of AMLO's government, but just because over the course of years and years and years, these criminal groups have been adapting.
Megan Janetsky, AP, when we're back on TE, what to do when you can't just get rid of all the criminals?
and other long-term care settings working to resolve problems related to the health, safety, welfare, and rights of residents. You can train as an ombudsman volunteer so you too can help this vulnerable population. Visit crowseniors.org.
Hi, I'm Michelle Mark. You know, at Morning Edition, we have a lot of serious conversations because there are a lot of really things happening in the world. But we take joy seriously, too.
That's how much the poem and that book of poems meant to me. It inspired my imagination, elevated my imagination.
Join us for inspiration.
Folks, Larry Hands I'm 91.7 WVH. This is 91.7 WVHU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUV Oxford. Cincinnati Public Radio for the greater Cincinnati and Oxford community.
Is it possible that plants are intelligent? I'm Ariel Dennis. This is Science Friday. New botany research details how plants can communicate with each other, can cleverly deceive insects, and even have the ability to mimic other plants.
I think we're all kind of culturally coming around to this idea that intelligence might exist in things that are brainless.
We'll talk with the author of a new book about the latest plant science that's sparking debate among botanists, and it may even completely shift how we understand the place of plants in the world. Plus, why some snails and slugs are unusually tolerant of urban LA. After this.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Highlighted an offer by Israel whose forces are advancing into central Rafah in southern Gaza.
Now offered Israel is offering comprehensive new proposal. It's a roadmap. During ceasefire, release of all hostages.
Biden also addressed former President Donald Trump's criminal conviction yesterday in a New York courtroom.
After careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. They found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts. Now he'll be given the opportunity, as he should, to appeal that decision just like everyone else has done. That's how the American system of justice works.
But today, Trump and many of his Republican supporters are questioning the integrity of the judicial system.
As far as the trial itself, it was very unfair. We weren't allowed to use our election expert under any circumstances. You saw what happened to some of the witnesses that were on our side. They were literally crucified by this man who looks like an angel, but he's really a devil.
The former president at Trump Tower today, speaking just feet away from the same escalator Trump rode down when he launched his 2016 presidential campaign. Here's Windsor Johnson reports on what's next for him.
University of Richmond law professor Carl Tobias says Trump's conviction is not expected to impact his ability to make a bid for a second term in the White House or send him to prison. Trump is facing 3 other indictments, including 2 cases that accuse him of trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Windsor Johnston, NPR News.
The U.S. Secretary of Education has announced big changes at the government office that oversees the federal student loan program. NPR's Corey Turner explains.
First, the why. After a multi-year effort to update the free application for federal student aid, known as the FAFSA, the Office of Federal Student Aid oversaw a disastrous rollout. That included months-long delays and glitches that made it hard for many students to finish the form. Now, in a letter to federal student aid staff, Education Secretary Miguel Cardona says the agency will be getting a top-to-bottom review, including new accountability measures for senior leaders.
That's NPR's Corey Turner reporting. You're listening to NPR News. A report from OpenAI says artificial intelligence is playing a larger role in covert campaigns designed to manipulate the public on social media. NPR's Shannon Bond has details.
OpenAI recently banned accounts linked to influence operations from Russia, China, Israel, and Iran. The campaigns use the company's tools, including ChatGPT, to generate articles and comments in multiple languages and to debug code. They posted across social networks, but failed to reach large audiences of real people, says Ben Nimmo, who leads investigations at OpenAI.
These operations may be using new technology, but they're still struggling with the old problem of how to get people to fall for it.
It's the first time OpenAI has announced takedowns of covert efforts to sway public opinion. The proliferation of AI that can create realistic text, images, video, and audio is raising fears around the potential for political manipulation in a busy election year. Shannon Bond, NPR News.
The United Kingdom's first black female member of parliament is being allowed to run in the upcoming general election for the Labour Party following a wave of uncertainty about her political future. Today, Labour leader Keir Starmer said Diane Abbott was free to stand as a Labour candidate July 4th. Abbott's future has been in question over the past year since she suggested Jewish and Irish people do not experience racism all their lives. She apologized for her remarks. The NASDAQ Composite Index is down 1.3% or 216 points. S&P's down 21 points. The Dow is up 221 points. It's NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from the Kids Mental Health Foundation, with a mission to make mental health a vital part of every child's upbringing, offering child mental health tools and resources for parents, classrooms, and workplaces at kidsmentalhealthfoundation.org. Good afternoon. It's 2:06. This is 91.7 WVXU. I'm Zach Carrion. Right now it's 74 degrees in Cincinnati, 71 in Dayton.
We heard you. You want more local news from a trusted local source. So we bring you our Daily View email, delivered to your inbox each morning and featuring stories from the WVXU award-winning news team. You will start your day up to date. Subscribe today at WVXU.org.
This is Science Friday. I'm Marielle Dumross, in for Ira Flato. Later in the hour, a conversation about plants and...
Ever since it was founded in 2014, Vox has strived to bring clarity, context, and nuance to the things that affect your world. Together, we've learned about AI, climate change, political extremism, fast fashion, parenting, and so much more. Now, this work would not be possible without you, and to celebrate our 10th anniversary, we're launching the Vox membership program. This is a new way to support our journalism. By joining the community, you're going to receive access to new perks, including members-only newsletters, the Highlight digital magazine, and the Highlight podcast, a once-a-month episode just for members featuring an interview by one of your favorite Vox journalists with an expert that they think the world should know better. We want this program to be something special for everyone who gives. To learn more, go to vox.com/members to join now, and thank you, as always, for your support.
Hi, this is Scott Galloway.
And I'm Ed Elson.
And we're the hosts, the co-hosts. It's kind of unfair to call us co-hosts. I'm really the host. He's my Robin Gibbons. Let's just be clear on what this is. But anyways, we're the hosts of Prop G Markets, your go-to podcast for all things money. Every Monday, we provide brash, unfiltered analysis on market-moving news, high-climb stocks, growing sectors, stupid war room decisions, and master of the universe CEOs.
And on Thursdays, we speak with some of the world's greatest finance professors, Wall Street insiders, and industry experts to keep you informed without getting bored. So if you want to understand money and how you can get more of it, you have to talk about money. We're here to help you do that. Follow Prop G Markets on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to automatically receive new episodes every Monday and every Thursday.
That's right. The good news is we know how to get you economic security. The bad news is the answer is slowly. We'll tell you how on Prop G Markets.
It's loud, deafening, cacophonous. It's a nightmare, oppressive.
And just what is it that many people think is pretty nightmarish and yet are still willing to shell out quite a bit of money for a night out at a restaurant?
Sound is the #1 complaint that diners have about their experience. So why are restaurants so loud, and when did that start happening?
Is there anything anyone can do to fix it? We've got the answers on the latest episode of Gastropod.
All that, plus the science behind the perfect playlist to accompany our meal. This special episode is part of our new collaboration with the podcast Switched on Pop.
Find Gastropod and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you a Mexican or a Mexicant?
I'm Flaco Ernst. I'm the senior Mexico analyst at the International Crisis.
When did the cartels and the gangs and the violence become such a predominant issue for Mexican politicians at the national level?
Corruption has always been a factor in Mexican politics, and there's never been a clear dividing line between state and crime in Mexico. Organized crime became powerful in the 20th century under the wings of authoritarian rule at the time led by the PRI party.
The party that ruled Mexico from 1929 to 2000 for more than 70 years.
And essentially they provided and sold protection to the drug cartels, and they could grow as an effect. And then at the same time, you had one president, Felipe Calderón, start what he called an all-out war against the cartels, with U.S. help and a lot of U.S. money being pumped into the process.
It's a common problem. It's an international problem. And the beginning of this sad story is that we have a neighbor which is the largest consumer of drugs in the world. So the United States needs to reduce consumption of drugs one way or another.
And essentially that led to a lot of kingpins being taken out of the picture, being killed, being arrested, being extradited to the US. But instead of the hopes that their organizations would falter as an automatic effect of these arrests, they splintered, and now you have many parts fighting over the throne, fighting over the inheritance of once large organizations.
Calderón himself went on national television Tuesday night to appeal to his countrymen to support the battle against organized crime.
I say this is a fight of all Mexicans, because criminals don't discriminate. They hurt all of society.
And so you end up with a situation where you have about 200 illegal armed groups out there today on Mexican streets. They're fighting each other, but no one is sufficiently powerful to actually get the job done and achieve dominance.
But criminal groups appear to have used this land in the state of Veracruz to dump at least 250 victims in a series of pits. They've been found.
Since the war began between Israel and Hamas, there have been attempts to negotiate a ceasefire. At the end of last year, a temporary deal was struck, and in the months since, the sides have had on and off negotiations.
6 months into Israel's war against Hamas, the two sides may be inching closer to a ceasefire deal.
Meanwhile, in Cairo, Hamas representatives are meeting with Egyptian and Qatari mediators on a ceasefire proposal.
Ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas are once again breaking down.
Our colleague Jared Walson has been covering these talks.
There have been different points in the last several months where you've had glimmers of hope where either Hamas or the Israelis will compromise on this thing or that thing, or the U.S. will exert pressure on one side or both. At the heart of the issue is that, Hamas is insisting on a deal that includes a permanent ceasefire and an end to the war with some kind of guarantee that that will take place. And Netanyahu has publicly said that he will not accept any deal that ends the war.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel's war in Gaza will continue until Hamas is destroyed. But Hamas is fighting back hard.
Do the Israelis have a way of achieving their stated aims, meaning Benjamin Netanyahu's stated aim of completely stamping out Hamas? He says he is unwilling to end the war without doing that. Hamas is showing signs that they can outlast this attack by Israel, meaning that this this risks dragging on for months, if not years.
And could that make this become a forever war?
That's the concern right now.
Welcome to The Journal, our show about money, business, and power. I'm Kate Linebaugh. It's Tuesday, May 21st. Coming up on the show, why the war in Gaza is so hard to end.
Courage. I learned it from my adoptive mom.
My hand? You hold my hand. Learn about adopting a teen from foster care at adoptuskids.org. You can't imagine the reward. Brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
After Hamas attacked Israel last October, Israel retaliated with a military campaign in Gaza, unleashing thousands of airstrikes and moving in ground troops. The assault began in the north, and Israeli forces have steadily moved south. Earlier this month, they reached the city of Rafah, which straddles the border with Egypt.
On the Palestinian side of the border, it is the poorest city in the Gaza Strip that is now, or has been, a refuge for the last several months for more than 1 million Palestinian civilians who fled their homes, mostly in the north of Gaza. When the Israeli military went into northern Gaza all the way back in October and November, they issued these evacuation notices urging the entire population of the north to go south.
When was it clear that Israel planned to go into Rafah?
Netanyahu has been threatening to launch this operation for months now. In his narration of this has been the plan the whole time. And to some extent, we reported on this in January, that it's a core part of the Israeli military's vision for what they wanted to do in the war is capture the Gazan side of the border with Egypt, because their complaint is that they view the Egyptian government, they say that they haven't done a good enough job of cutting off Hamas's smuggling of weapons. Egypt disputes this, of course, but they say it's very important for their security to have taken the border.
Rafah was theoretically the last major stop in Israel's campaign. But then, something unexpected happened. Hamas started fighting back in the north, an area that Israel had secured months ago. And this forced Israel to go back into these areas and fight.
From the military's point of view, they have cleared out Hamas, at least initially, from the northern and central parts of Gaza. They've pulled out of those areas, and what Hamas is doing is they're coming back. They are coming back not only as a militant group and carrying out attacks on Israeli forces. The Israelis have then gone back into those areas that they invaded back in October, November, December with tanks, heavy weaponry, and you're seeing the kind of fighting there that you saw in the initial phase of the war again.
And what has Israel said about this?
Israeli security officials, military leaders, intelligence officials, this is what they will say, is that Hamas themselves, they have shown a remarkable flexibility to adapt to the situation, where they've kind of gone back to being a guerrilla fighting force, where, again, all they have to do in this situation is survive enough to continue launching attacks, and they've shown that they can do that.
What do those guerrilla tactics look like?
It basically involves using smaller groups of fighters where they pop up, they carry out these one-off attacks where they'll, fire a missile at Israeli forces. The Israelis will come back in and fire back, and then they disappear again, where you don't really need the entire structure of the military force in place to do that. You just need a few guys, and they don't even have to be very heavily armed to pull that off.
And how is Hamas doing that? Is Hamas recruiting new people?
Hamas is a group that started as a social movement in the Gaza Strip in the 1980s. organizing in opposition to the Israeli occupation of Gaza at that time. And so it can kind of draw on that history of doing that in this situation. And this is not to say that everyone in Gaza supports Hamas. It's just to say that all they have to do is recruit a few new members, or a few new recruits for their military wing to continue sustaining themselves.
One key to Hamas's staying power is using a vast underground tunnel system.
This is potentially the number one reason that Hamas has been able to outlast this, which is that they have miles of underground tunnels they've built up over the course of decades, where they're able to hide their leadership. It's where they've taken the Israeli hostages that they took during the October 7th attack. They use them to move around the strip and obviously, hide from Israeli surveillance. The other issue is that there is no competitor in terms of Palestinian political leadership in these areas. And when the IDF has gone in and then withdrawn, you have a power vacuum that, as far as we can tell from talking to Israeli military officials, Israeli and U.S. intelligence assessments, is that Hamas is filling that vacuum.
So the Israeli offensive has destroyed so much of Gaza, killed tens of thousands of people, but hasn't been able to destroy Hamas.
Exactly. That is the unsavory reality that Israeli leadership, Israeli military officials, and Israeli society to some degree is reckoning with.
And this is one reason why Israel is pushing into Rafah. That's next.
Over 25 years ago, on September 29th, 1998, we watched a Brady girl with curly hair drop everything to follow a guy she only kind of knew all the way to college. And so began Felicity. My name is Juliette Littman, and I'm a Felicity superfan. Join me, Amanda Foreman, who you may know better as Megan, the roommate, and Greg Grunberg, who you may also know as Sean Blunberg, as the three of us revisit our favorite moments from the show and talk to the people who helped shape it. Listen to Dear Felicity on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, guess what? I know you were wondering, and yes, it's true. You can follow Distractable on Spotify, the only place to get the video. There's video now. We have video now.
Yes, and it's free. People don't seem to understand that. You can get quality entertainment and quality video for free.
2 episodes every week, every Monday, every Friday. Video. Only on Spotify. Sick new video. Looks fantastic. The best video podcast probably that's ever existed. How will you know unless you watch and follow?
Earlier this month, Israel dropped flyers over Rafah, telling Palestinians to evacuate parts of the city. Soon after, Israel fired airstrikes on the city, took over the border crossing, and moved tanks in.
Netanyahu has made the Rafah campaign a priority for him and for his government, where he is saying the military has to go in to destroy the remaining Hamas military forces that are in that area in order to win the war. He is saying this is necessary for his vision of victory.
What does it look like right now in Rafah for the Palestinians who live there?
It's a desperate situation. This is already a place where there's been no reliable electricity for months, little reliable drinking water. There's about 1 million people in Gaza who are experiencing famine-like conditions. That's according to the UN-backed body that assesses hunger crises around the world. People have been, chopping down trees and burning scrap wood and garbage to cook. People are sleeping in the street, in tents, in abandoned buildings. These are people who are living their lives as normal prior to October 7th, when Hamas launched its attack on Israel, and who have had to drop everything and have been essentially on the run since then.
But Israel's move into Rafah appear to go against the U.S., its biggest ally. President Biden has described an Israeli invasion of Rafah as a red line, not to be crossed. Biden has said that Rafah was the red line. Where does that stand now?
That's a great question because, so Biden, in one of the biggest reversals of his policy during the war, decided earlier in May, as you know, to withhold certain types of bombs for the Israeli military in order to push back on Israel's plan to attack Rafah. And what Biden said in his interview with CNN earlier this month is, we're doing this in order to stop Israel from using these bombs to attack the population centers there. And that's the distinction they've drawn, is between Rafah in general and the population centers. How they judge when that line has been crossed, that's, I assume, the question that is being addressed inside the White House and inside the administration right now.
But last week, the Biden administration notified Congress that it was going ahead with a different arms package for Israel, worth more than $1 billion.
The administration is moving forward with these separate weapons deals in which they are approving the future transfer of artillery shells, mortars, and armored vehicles for the Israeli military. And what they're saying essentially is the U.S. is still broadly supportive of Israel and its long-term defense and of the Israeli military in general. The question is this an effective policy, and what message are the Israelis going to take from this broader policy where this larger pipeline of weapons remains open?
Okay, so turning back to Rafah, with Israeli forces on the ground there, are we getting to the final stages of Israel's military campaign?
This is the crux of the issue, is that Netanyahu, in his public rhetoric, what he is saying to the Israeli public is, we must invade Rafah in order to achieve victory, by which he means this idea of total victory. And what we've seen in our reporting and what we hear from Israeli military officials, from security officials in both the U.S. and in Israel, is that all indications show that Hamas will survive this, whether they do the operation or not. And that means that if Netanyahu is determined to try to stamp out Hamas completely, this conflict will drag on for months, if not years, if not longer.
And if it drags on, and it sort of looks more like a forever war, what does that mean for Gaza and for Israel?
For Gaza, it means that the misery on the ground for people in Gaza will continue. For Israel, it means that this pressure on the Israeli military will continue, where you have the IDF, which is a kind of people's army. It is largely made up of reservists who are part-time soldiers who have been called up to active duty to fight this war, who will tell you they're exhausted. That means they'll have to continue fighting.
What does it mean for Netanyahu?
For him, let me put it this way. So within Israel, there's a lot of criticism of Netanyahu among people who blame him for dragging out the war. And a lot of Netanyahu's critics are saying right now that he's dragging this out essentially because it's in his political interest. The polls show that the majority of Israelis would take a deal with Hamas that would release the hostages. But in Netanyahu's narration of this, he is saying, we are fighting a war against Hamas. The only solution is total victory. We cannot allow this group that carried out this heinous attack to continue to exist.
And what does it mean kind of more broadly for the Middle East, for the U.S., for the, for the globe?
Gaza is the linchpin to this larger crisis in the Middle East. The war in Gaza has led to this larger escalation where you've had the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. You have attacks by Houthi rebels in Yemen that have disrupted shipping in the Red Sea, forcing ships to go around the Horn of Africa instead of through the Suez Canal. stopped the Iranian-backed militias and forces, they also stopped. In other words, there's a lot of evidence that the only way to stop this larger regional conflict that's happening is to get to a ceasefire in Gaza. So those are the stakes.
That's all for today, Tuesday, May 21st. The Journal is a co-production of Spotify and The Wall Street Journal. Additional reporting in this episode by Summer Saeed. Before you go, we have a quick question for you for an upcoming episode. If you had all the money in the world, what problem would you solve? Send your answers either by voice memo or email to thejournal@wsj.com. That's thejournal@wsj.com. Thanks for listening.